We all have a story. Who's going to write yours? Hey y'all, welcome back to Life Starring Deb. I'm Deb and I am so happy that you joined me for today's episode. All of these names make up the person that I am. All of those names are attached to it, events, experiences, and things that have happened throughout the course of my life that have made me who I am. But how would anyone know those stories and experiences and details of my life unless I share them? We all have a story and we all have a voice. So it's time to put pen to paper or mouth to mic and open up our mouths and tell our story. One of the things that I love most when I get together with my family or my friends is to sit around and hear stories about their life growing up. I've oftentimes listened to my kids talk about things that have happened to them in the course of their life, and I'm looking at them like, well, when did that happen? And how come I didn't know? And I also remember a time when my grandmother passed, and we were all at her funeral. My grandmother passed she was 101 years old when she passed. Lived a good, full life. And we were at her funeral, and different people went up to talk about my grandmother and to say, things about her. And when it came time to read her obituary, and my cousin wrote it in such detail, that when my oldest son, Tony, went up to speak, he was like, wow, Grandma was some kind of person. And then he said something that I'll never forget. He said, but how come I didn't know these things about Grandma? Man, that struck me because I thought we had shared a lot about Grandma's story, but obviously we didn't speak enough about the things that made Grandma, Grandma. And so I feel like we, especially those of us that are aging, that are getting to a certain point in our life, we need to tell our story. And no one can tell our story better than us. How many times have you been around and someone was talking about something that happened maybe when you all were together, and they're telling the story their way, and then you're thinking, that's not what happened, or that's not how that happened? It happens all the time, because if you don't tell your story your way, then it gives someone else an opportunity to tell the story their way, which may not necessarily be the way that the story happened. Part of my story is game shows. My family and I get together and we make up games in the living room and we play them often. So often that we auditioned for Family Feud. Now, when you audition for Family Feud, they want to know you. They want to see your personality. They want your personality to jump out on the screen because that sells. And they don't want boring TV. So obviously, my family was exciting enough to the producers that they put us on the show. And then my cousins and I recently went on another show, America Says, for the same reason. We had to audition in front of a camera, in front of producers, and they thought that we were exciting enough to bring us on the show. Now, my little people, my grandchildren, wait a minute. I think I hear them doing a game show right now. Let's listen.
And we're back on the game show of Grandma. Let me get a round of applause. So we want to introduce everyone sitting here. Let's start with the young man over here. What's your name, sir?
Amir.
Amir. And what's your name, young lady?
Anaya.
And you're next. What is your name?
Jordan.
And you at the very end.
Haley.
Hello. And you guys are the grandchildren of who?
Deborah Price.
Deborah Price. So we're going to get this thing going. We want to know who knows Grandma best. Do you think you know her best?
I do. Me.
Okay,
Definitely
well,
me.
Let's see.
Definitely me.
I got my co-host here, Casey Price. Woo, woo.
Woo!
Who is Grandma's favorite singer?
Michael Jackson. What do you agree with?
Okay.
Michael Jackson.
Correct. All right, next question. What was the name of the first car that Grandma owned?
Oh, it was the one without the roof. It was the one without the roof. What's that called? Okay, alright.
Your answer is?
Cadillac.
A Cadillac is wrong.
Grandma told me one day.
Actually, the answer is Toyota.
A Toyota.
Toyota.
Okay.
What is Grandma's favorite chocolate bar?
Hershey's. We agree with Hershey's.
Hershey's is correct. Ding, 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 ding. In junior high school, Grandma won many awards. What awards did she win? Now listen, it's a multiple choice, so here are the answers. Was it A, Best Dressed Award, B, Best Dancer Award, C, Class Clown Award, or D, all the above? She won all three awards. What do you think?
Oh, she is good at everything. Oh, yeah. We gotta think of all of them.
All the above is correct! Yay! Way to work together, Prize
I was thinking
grandchildren.
everyone was amazing.
Yeah!
She does it every day.
She does it every day, huh? She's funny, she's dancing, all of that
She's
every
like a
day.
clown. She laughs good.
Okay. Bonus question. What was the name of the dance show Grandma was on when she was a teenager?
Okay. We agree with Soul Train.
Woo!
Hey,
Bonus points! Bonus-
A Cadillac. A Cadillac was not my first car. As a matter of fact, I don't think I ever wanted a Cadillac, and I can only remember riding in a Cadillac a few times. But hey, they got that from somewhere. And that's what I mean. Sometimes stories repeat themselves, and depending on who's telling the story about you, the story could change. And when we have an opportunity to share our story, a lot of times we tend to lean towards the part of our lives that were good or flowery or exciting. And we leave out the part of our lives where there's pain, right? And that's natural. Sometimes it's us. We just don't want to revisit that part of our lives. And other times it's like everybody can't handle your story. Like me, sometimes people will tell me that they feel like I've always been this person, that I've always been well-spoken and put together. But no, that is not my story. My well is deep. Imagine this. My mother was a teenage mom when she had me. She died young of an overdose of heroin. I was not raised with my father in the house. I was raised by my grandmother, who was borderline alcoholic, who lived to be 101, but she was already up in age when I was born. And so a lot of my life experience came from me just experiencing and exploring life, right? Without my mother or my father being in the household. And that started a process for me of exploring and trying to fit all the pieces of my life, right? And, why am I the way that I am? How come I? And who else was? And things like that. So I feel like my whole life has been about discovering, like always searching for answers, that a lot of the answers to the questions I have lie with people that are no longer on this earth. And there's pain there. But there's healing in that, and it definitely will help someone else along the way when I open my mouth and tell my story. And now I've finally gotten to the place in my life where I open my mouth and I tell my story, because it's mine. It's my story. And hopefully the words that I say to other people will help them in their journey, so that they then can become their own voice and tell their story their way. Because I am the only expert on my life the way I live it. And so are you. So you don't want to wait until you don't have an opportunity to tell your story, when someone may get up on a podium and tell your story, and they don't accurately tell your story. But more important than that, you are going to be somebody's ancestor. Someone generations from now will be talking about you. And you want the things that they say to be the things that happen. So again, put your pen to paper and start writing. Or sit around and talk. I remember when the last stages of my grandmother's life, she had dementia. And oftentimes she would go back to her childhood and just start talking. And she would be talking to the members of the family like we were the people, like her mom and her brothers and sisters. And she would be telling stories. And I wish I had a tape recorder, that I could have recorded some of the things that she said, because those were things that I had never heard. And I thought I knew so much about my grandmother, but I didn't. And so I want to make sure that my children, my grandchildren, their kids, and their grandchildren will learn about Grandma Deb. Who was Grandma Deb? Who is Grandma Deb? So ironically, I was in Target. Shout out to Target, the only place I can go to get toilet paper, but end up with a bunch of stuff that I didn't go in there for. But that's another story for another day. Anyway, I was in Target and I was browsing around, and I ran across this book. And this book is called Your Grandmother's Story. Now, the book is supposed to be something that one of your grandchildren will give you. You fill out the book and then you give it back. Well, I couldn't wait for one of my grandchildren to gift me with this book. It's something that I wanted to start right away. It's a project, so to speak. So I purchased the book and I brought it home, and then I started skimming through the questions and actually started answering some of the questions. The book goes from early childhood all the way to being a grandmother. And it asks all kinds of questions about that time in your life. Like, some of the questions were, well, wait a minute. Let me put my glasses on so I can just read you the questions so you know what I'm talking about, because I'm a grandmother. So some of the questions were like one of them. Grandma, when did you have your first kiss? Who was it with, and how did it make you feel? It also asked questions about, what were some of your biggest disappointments in your life, in high school, college, or after? It asked questions like, how different did you raise my parents than the way that they're raising me? It asked questions like, how do you feel about abortion? Grandma, did you vote? And why? Who did you vote for? Then it asked questions like, what was one of your most embarrassing moments and how did you deal with it? How did you deal with disappointment? Tell us about some of your accomplishments. And then as it gets down to my mature years, it asks questions like, if you could go back in time, what would you do differently? It asks, how did you meet Grandpa? It also asks, Grandma, are you afraid of dying? The book is rich, and it's filled with questions that I may not necessarily want to deal with right now, but it's definitely going to be questions that I'm going to answer because I want my family to know. And I want my family to see it written on the page from my hand to pen. My penmanship, my printing, because that also tells a story about who I am, the way I write. And it's going to be honest. I'm not going to leave anything out because I know that my story, the things that I've gone through in life, some of my accomplishments, some of my failures, some of my wish I could do-overs will be in the pages of this book. And I don't know if my children or my grandchildren might experience some of these things in their life, but at least they'll be able to look at this from my perspective of how I got over and how I did it, or how I struggled with whatever it is that I struggle with. But at the end of the day, what they won't get is the answer that my grandson gave in the game show.
How are we supposed to know that?
It's okay. Now,
How are they supposed to know that? So I hope that you enjoyed today's episode. It definitely will give you something to think about and hopefully start a project. It doesn't have to be this elaborate as a book. You can start it on a notepad or start recording it on a tape recorder or your phone. Or the fact is, we are going to be somebody's ancestor, and we want them to be able to listen to our words or read our words, know that they came from us, and know that it's honest. So the question is, what makes you feel like a kid again? What makes me feel like a kid again is laughing and giggling, eating cereal in my pajamas on the floor with my grandchildren, watching cartoons, looking at old pictures when I was a little kid and thinking about the memories and the experiences that happened behind those pictures. That is what makes me feel like a kid again.